Arguably one of the greatest scenes in modern cinema, and certainly one of my favorites from the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, is of course the lighting of the beacons and Gondor's call for aid. One by one, the peaks of the White Mountains burn bright. The theme of Gondor builds up with every passing second until finally we reach Edoras and Gondor's true king, who relays the message to Theoden that Gondor calls for aid, and to which Theoden famously says that Rohan will answer. We all know this scene, and most of us, myself included, get goosebumps whenever it comes on. Nonetheless, from the perspective of the Lord of the Rings books, this scene not only never happened and is inaccurate in terms of the lore, world building, and geography of Middle-earth, but it is also wrong when it comes to the themes of Tolkien's characters. Now, I am very much aware that Peter Jackson read the same books that I did, and knew what he was and was not changing, but I think it is nevertheless important to highlight what Tolkien's vision was in order to gain a better perspective on that vision's adaptation, whether for the better or for the worse. In the movies, what precedes the scene that I just described is also a setup that never occurred. This, of course, is the completely distraught Denethor refusing to call for any aid and essentially abandoning Minas Tirith and its people to their fates. Movie Denethor has fallen to such a point and is so disgruntled with the world, as well as nihilistic, that he sees no point in calling for anyone, as in his mind, they would never come anyway. This forces Gandalf, and most importantly Pippin, to light the beacons themselves, with the Hobbit managing to complete the deed by distracting a set of guards. The beacon of Minas Tirith then causes the next closest beacon to be lit, and by that point there is nothing that Denethor can do to stop the message from heading straight to Edoras and the Rohirrim. As I said before, this never happened on a number of levels. For starters, the beacons were, in fact, not a communication system between the kingdoms of Gondor and of Rohan, which connected their two capitals, Minas Tirith and Edoras. The beacons were actually two communication systems that connected the administrative center of Gondor with its northern and southern provinces. The one that is described extensively in the books and shown in the movies is of course the northern one. Essentially, the rulers of Gondor would use the beacons to warn their compatriots in the provinces, or vice versa, similarly to how the Byzantines would warn fellow Byzantines of Arab raids. In the books, instead of Denethor asking Rohan for help through the beacons, he sends a messenger carrying the red arrow, a symbol of the eternal alliance of Gondor and Rohan. After receiving the messenger, Theoden immediately answers the call, and at no time during the books is he doubtful of either Gondor's alliance or his duty to assist the men of the West, something in which the movie diverges heavily. Moreover, this dynamic is incredibly important for the character of Denethor. Whereas he used to be one of the greatest of his people, through Sauron's corruption, he had fallen greatly. Nonetheless, he had not fallen to the point shown in the movies, and he did hold out at least some hope that Rohan would help. The messengers that had carried the red arrow, however, and the news of Theoden's answer, never reached Denethor himself, as they were killed by orcs before reaching Minas Tirith. It was this step, this brick if you will, that was added to the already tall wall of Denethor's increasing nihilism, and which made him think that he was all alone behind the gates of Minas Tirith, an additional factor as well as character development that was omitted from the movies. Moving on from the basics of the beacons and our characters, let us see how the changes of the movies altered the lore and geography of Middle-earth itself. For starters, in the books, there is a grand total of only 7 beacons, all named by Tolkien. The first beacon is not located on top of Minas Tirith, but instead on a nearby hill of Amon Din, and the final one is not located within viewing distance of Edoras, but instead on Halifirian, or Amon Anvar, the great and sacred mountain between Rohan and Gondor. The very place, by the way, that the Oath of Eorl took place, which established the kingdom of Rohan itself, after the Steward of Gondor gave it to the people of Eorl. So all in all, the movies changed the amount of beacons, where those beacons were located, their history and most importantly purpose, as well as their actual role within the story itself. Not to mention that their purpose within the movies was to elevate the role of Pippin at the expense of Denethor, who lost a key part of his character development. Instead of going from strong but troubled to nihilistic to insane and ultimately giving up, The movies skipped that first and very important part entirely. To add to the misrepresentation of Denethor in the movies, I would also like to say that he is portrayed as having been broken following the death of Boromir, and that this is what causes him to be the way he is in The Return of the King. In the books, however, the effect of Boromir's death on Denethor, while massive, is lesser when it comes to Denethor's competence, which is only completely shattered when he thinks that Boromir too has died. This, in my opinion, places considerably more emphasis on the importance of the character of Faramir from the perspective of Denethor, which is ultimately all portrayed through Book Denethor's ease at calling for aid through both the beacons and the arrow, as he has not lost all hope yet, in contrast to movie Denethor having given up from the get-go. Something equally important to emphasize is that Denethor had essentially been engaging in a mental battle with Sauron for years, which degenerated and aged him greatly, but he nonetheless was able to make the sound decision of calling for aid, and it is only the loss of all of his boys that sent him over the edge. Contrast this to a Denethor that was not able to withstand Sauron's corruption, did not protect his people, did not make the sound decisions, and was merely a dead weight on the Stewart's throne, which I think has some similarities to Theoden's character progression, as I mentioned earlier, in how he originally hinted at refusing to help Gondor, for letting the Westfold fall, apparently. To conclude, I think Peter Jackson wanted to simplify this part of the books and combine the beacons with the Red Arrow, while simultaneously giving some more spotlight to Pippin, which he was missing from the books. Remember that he had already done this before, when he entirely changed how the Entmoot went in the Two Towers. From a movie perspective, it was Pippin that traveled with us from the Shire, and therefore the viewer would be more connected to him than to Denethor. This likely motivated the writers to simply dedicate more to a pre-existing main character as opposed to Denethor and his arc, and therefore it also made Denethor more unlikable, further simplified him, and did admittedly provide for an incredible scene that managed to include Aragorn and Theoden too, thereby resolving the other change that they made, which was Theoden not being fully committed to help Gondor. All of these were conscious alterations that were largely made to cover other conscious alterations, and whether you or I like it is subjective. What is not subjective, however, is Tolkien's intention with the beacons, the Gondor-Rohan alliance, and most importantly, the progression, themes, and philosophy behind the fall of mighty Denethor. It is this last part especially that I hope in this video I was able to help you understand and appreciate, and to provide an additional perspective on the movie trilogy as an adaptation of the Lord of the Rings books. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.